Technology, business, multimedia, wellness and health, events, reviews, and more. This is Mary Collins from LifeHakX Media, and I have the pleasure to have Scott Burnstein online with me today. Hi, Scott. How are you?
Hi, Mary. Nice to be with you, and I'm excited to chat.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to tell the audience a little bit about you first. So this is extremely exciting for me because I have been following Scott for quite a few years now as he's been working on a documentary as a reporter and a freelance journalist. So Scott is an author. He's a lawyer as well, correct, Scott? You've got the good old Chicago law degree.
The law degree, I don't practice.
Okay. Well, Scott is an author, a journalist, a historian, and focuses on organized crime as his expertise. Based in the Midwest, he has written extensively about various forms of mob activity in Detroit, Chicago, New England, and Philadelphia. He has published 6 books on the subject of organized crime and produced 3 documentaries. He has founded the Gangster Report web magazine in 2014 and has become one of the leading media outlets for the American underworld news. He is currently working with Oakland Press and has written for the Detroit Press, New York Daily Post, Ambassador Magazine, Chicago Magazine, the Huffington Post, and CBS.com. His podcast, The OG, which is the original Gangster, explores the nexus between crime and pop culture and was launched in the summer of 2019 and named one of Time Magazine and Radio.com's top 10 true crime podcasts. So with that, Scott, need I say more? There is so much more.
A reputation precedes me, even overseas.
Perfect for a gangster documentarist, right? So speaking of which, like you talking about having that law degree earlier, what made you decide to go into freelance journalism and then focus on documentaries and podcasts about gangsters?
Well, I initially started authoring, and I got a book deal when I was 28, 29. And I was of the belief, I guess, that once I got a book deal, that was my
golden ticket.
That was my career. I was just going to be an author, and I just go from book to book. And then I quickly came to the realization that that's not a sustainable business model. That if you write a book, that doesn't mean that that's gonna be able to pay the bills. So I became a reporter. So I did it backwards. Usually you become a reporter and then you become an author. I became an author and then I became a reporter. So didn't go to journalism school or anything. I went to law school and I studied political science in undergrad. And in law school, I was working for the Attorney General in Chicago and was working mob cases. And I got really interested in the cases that I was working as an intern, and decided I wanted to write about crime as opposed to litigate it. And,
and here we are.
15 years later, here we are.
Perfect. Well, now speaking of which, I remember, ages ago, it seemed like ages ago, you were kind of like on the side of fighting for a specific mobster. Well, he's not even a mobster, really. I mean, your documentary kind of proves that now. But this documentary has now finally been released, and it's called White Boy. But I think also the movie White Boy Rick, you said with Matthew McConaughey, which is like, wow, I haven't even seen that one yet.
Because it's not very good. That's why.
No.
Not a lot of people saw it.
You know what? I think it's all about marketing. I don't know if it's a case of the best movies are out there.
No, it was marketed quite well, actually. They put $5 million into the marketing, so there was a ton of publicity for the film leading up to it. It just wasn't very good.
Right. Okay. So do you think that's the acting or the directing, or what do you think that it was just like a combination of the writer?
Well, they based the first screenplay was based on my reporting, so I was a fan of the first screenplay, and then they kind of started to futz with it, play around with it, and they got, it was like 20 versions later. They shot the movie based on a script that was kind of a far cry from the original script that was based on all my reporting. So it just
got out of hand.
it was too many cooks in the kitchen. The acting, I thought the acting was good. The directing and the production were lacking, in my opinion. I worked on both the film and the documentary. I worked on the film for 2 years. I worked on the film. I worked on the film for 3 years. I worked on the documentary for 2 years.
Okay.
I'm considerably more proud of the documentary.
Okay. Well, saying that now, what made you sort of specifically choose to focus on Richard Wersch Jr.?
It's Rick Wersch.
Rick Wersch, thank you. I mean, it is a fascinating story, but like, what made you decide out of all the gangsters to kind of choose him?
Well, I didn't really choose him as a documentary subject. I had been reporting on him and his case since 2006, and it was my reporting that really pushed an alternate narrative for him. The story that had been told before 2006 was that he was this teenage white drug kingpin in Detroit. And that was really the story that people knew. Then when I came on the scene in 2006, I was able to break all the big news related to his story, what I would consider the second half of his story, which was that in fact he was a creation of the U.S. government and was bought and paid for by Uncle Sam, had been recruited out of 8th grade to be a drug mole. So that was all of my reporting and all of my hard work as an investigative journalist. So, I had been, dubbed the white boy Rick guy at least in the local press here in Detroit for a good 12 years before the film came out, and a good, decade before we started working on the documentary. So, it was only, it was a natural progression to go from writing about him for my newspaper and going on television and radio, advocating for him to finally see the light of day, because he was doing, for people that don't know, he was doing life in prison for a traffic stop when he was 17, which is really what it broke down to. He rolled a stop sign in front of his grandma's house when he was 17 in May of 1987, and they found some cocaine, and because of a lot of mitigating circumstance, or a lot of extenuating circumstances, in the sense that he had been working with the government, and the government wanted to keep that employment hush hush and kind of bury the story of using him for 2 years to build cases, under the prison that they put him under.
Yeah, that's crazy.
They wanted to bury him and all the secrets underneath that prison, and I was able to excavate it and bring it to light. And so it was just the documentary was a conclusion of a decade long chronicling of his case.
Okay, so you were saying that you've been documenting this for over a decade now. Not
at this point, it's been a decade and a half. But when we started working on the documentary, it had been a decade. But it's 2021 now, and I started writing about him and exposing the wrongdoing surrounding his case in around 2006, 2007.
Okay. All right. So when you go for planning something like this, what would be one of your main life hacks? Like, what would your focuses be when you're trying to invest, like with investigative journalism, and then creating a documentary or a book or a podcast towards that? What would you say your main structure is?
My main structure, just good storytelling. I mean, good storytelling is transcendent, and I think it transcends mediums too. So if you're a good storyteller, you're going to be a good storyteller with the written word. You'll be a good storyteller as an orator, and I think that I'm a good storyteller as a documentarian as well. I don't claim to direct or edit any of these projects that I've been involved in, but in terms of the vision and all the infrastructure and the collecting the interviews and creating the narrative, that's all me. So.
Well, there you go. I mean, that in itself, would you say planning is one of your top life hacks? Because even to find the subject matter, there's a process. You don't want to make up stuff that's not true, so you have to dig a little deeper. So what would be like a regular start of a new project? What would be the kind of point one, point two, this is what I've got to get done for this to work and be a success?
Well, you just you go to the source. You go to the root of whatever story you're trying to tell, to where the seeds were planted. And for me, I always try to get face to face with either the subject or people that are close to the subject, and were, whether the subject's dead or not, was close with them and can shed perspective and insight that you couldn't get from a Wikipedia post.
From the horse's mouth, as they say. So yeah. What was it like then? Did you get a chance to talk to Rick personally over the years, or?
Yeah, of course. That was the root of my reporting, was going to sit with him and
how did he seem to you?
I sat with him for I visited him, I don't know, 100 times in that time period. I spoke to him every day for 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was definitely not writing about him from arm's length. Yeah. If anything, I overstepped boundaries in terms of, writer subject.
Right. So isn't that quite difficult is it hard not to get drawn in?
Yeah.
Because all criminals are innocent, right?
Well, in his case, it was just like, it was so extreme.
Yeah. How did he get recruited at 13? What happened exactly?
When he was 14, his dad was a federal informant, a paid confidential informant that was trading information on illegal gun sales to the FBI and Detroit Police Department in exchange for cash. He had been doing it for 3 years at that point. So Rick was recruited in the summer of '84. Richard Sr. had been an informant since 1981. And on some of those interactions with law enforcement where he would trade information for cash, he would bring his son with him. And
he got pulled in.
The federal agents began to notice that Richard's son was street smart and precocious and eager to please. And at a certain point, these FBI agents were transferred from the gun squad to a drug squad, and their main target for their drug squad was the biggest kingpin on the east side of Detroit, Johnny Curry, and the Curry Boys gang. And they happened to live and operate out of Rick and Richard's neighborhood. And the FBI decided, the DPD, the FBI were a part of this task force that was FBI, DEA, Detroit Police Department, and they figured that a 14-year-old white kid would be, the perfect person to infiltrate the Curry gang, because no one would suspect that a 14-year-old white kid was actually working for the government.
Crazy.
And within 3 months, less than 3 months, Rick had worked his way up to becoming Johnny Curry's right-hand man.
Yeah. Well, so now that and I remember you saying that there was a lot more that happened to him that even the documentary tells you. There was quite a lot of abuse that went around, and he had to go through quite a lot of trials. It just is no one being held responsible in the government for this? Did the FBI are there rules
at this point
about how old somebody can be before you can manipulate them like that? That's like
there needs to be accountability.
Yeah.
I hope that this Netflix inspired surge of attention on the case bring some accountability. But unfortunately, a lot of the puppeteers here are dead and gone and buried. Coleman Young and Gil Hill, who were the, in my opinion, the primary conspirators in keeping Rick locked up and keeping this false narrative going in the press until I came along. They're both passed away.
I mean, you mentioned Gil Hill. Sorry, you mentioned Gil Hill. I mean, people, us older folks, like, wait a minute, where have I heard that name before? Wait, was that like Beverly Hills Cop?
Yeah.
Wasn't he like an actor?
Yeah, he was if people are familiar with the Beverly Hills Cop trilogy, Gil Hill played Inspector Todd, who was Eddie Murphy's boss in the movie.
And he was a gangster for real.
Well, he wasn't a gangster per se. He was the head of the Detroit City Council and was the head of the homicide division in Detroit Police Department. So, I mean, if he was a gangster, he was a gangster with a badge. I just want to be clear that I'm not.
Right. You're not accusing.
He's never been convicted of anything. And,
right. But there's definitely connections in that world, isn't there? Like once you put your toe into the water.
A lot of connections. But he was also a very prominent political figure, as well as Coleman Young. Coleman Young was the mayor of Detroit for 20 years. He was the first African-American mayor of any major city. And him and Gil Hill were probably, in 1987 when Rick was arrested for this, in the city of Detroit, I don't think there was really much of a question that the two most powerful people in the city at that time were Gil Hill, who was the mayor, Gil Hill, who was the homicide inspector, and Coleman Young, who was the mayor of the city.
Why work harder when you can work smarter and live better? Life hacks.
And Coleman Young was going on television and calling Rick a stool pigeon. I mean, this is the mayor of Detroit going after a kid who had been a cooperator at that point, had been acknowledged that he had been cooperating. And instead of, lauding him for helping clean up the city, the mayor of Detroit goes on television and calls him a rat.
And wasn't there a bit more as well? Because the mayor's, niece or something was like having an affair with the big kingpin of the time?
The mayor's niece was having an affair with Rick.
Right. But also, wasn't she also involved with Curry?
She was married to Johnny Curry, who was the drug kingpin that the task force had sent Rick in to infiltrate and bring down.
See.
When Rick was successful in that, after a 2-year operation, they arrested Johnny Curry and put him in prison. And within a couple of days, Rick was having a relationship with his wife, who was Kathy Folsom Curry, who was Johnny Curry's wife and Mayor Coleman Young's niece.
Wow.
More like a daughter to Coleman Young.
You couldn't even make this up. This is crazy.
You make it up. Rick was 16.
16 years old.
She was 24 and black. So it was actually statutory rape.
Oh my Lord. And of course no one is being held responsible. And speaking of which now,
well, the media it was like a moth to a flame. The media went crazy over that.
Right, but the wrong person got punished for it.
No,
did she get punished?
I'm talking about the relationship.
Yeah, I know, but did she get in any kind of trouble for that relationship?
I mean, trouble in the sense that
jail time, maybe?
No, Kathy didn't do any jail time. She had to go to rehab. Rick's cooperation protected Kathy. He made sure that any of the cooperation that he did, Kathy would not be indicted. So she was an unindicted co-conspirator on a bunch of stuff.
Wonderful.
She was protected by the mayor, though, as well. I mean,
yeah. Wow, that's just so. So with all the madness that you have experienced with these cases, how now with your documentaries is it going? How has the pandemic affected your media schedule in regards to documentaries and funding and everything and research?
Well, it's flipped everything upside down. I'm not saying I'm not a documentarian because I'm working on another documentary right now, but I would probably categorize myself more as a author or journalist or content provider. I don't know if maybe I guess having a documentary on Netflix that's trending makes me a documentarian now, I suppose. But
take the credit. Just take it.
So yeah, I'm working on another project right now that I'm very passionate about. It's called Missing Lauren Spear. It's about the disappearance of a co-ed at Indiana University 10 years ago. I went to college there 20 years ago, but 10 years ago, a girl from New York named Lauren Spear, a 20-year-old fashion design major, disappeared after a night of partying. Nobody's ever found her body.
Oh my
The
gosh.
suspects are all her closest friends. Someone got away with murder, and they're living their lives now. These people are all in their 30s now, and they're spread across the country. And one of them, or several of them, murdered Lauren and got rid of her body, and we're trying to expose that. So,
wow.
The pandemic really, put us on pause for almost a year.
Yeah. So will you have a book about that first?
Funding started to dry up, and
Mm.
the production stalled, and it was tough. And then I have other projects that I'm involved in out in California and in the television and film industry in Hollywood. And, everything started to regress as opposed to move forward, which it was, pre-pandemic.
Right. And so will this still be in the form of a book while we're waiting?
No. The Lauren Spear case is a documentary.
No, I know, but I mean, like, while you're waiting for things to clear up with.
Well, we're back
filming.
we're back
You
on
are?
schedule with filming.
Okay.
A year later, but we're negotiating with some platforms, including Netflix, about placing this next documentary. The heat that we have from the Netflix White Boy Rick explosion has definitely helped grease the wheels with Netflix. They're definitely interested in possibly doing business with us again. So I hope that the Missing Lauren Spear project is on a premium streaming platform, this time next year.
Okay, wonderful. And speaking of which, what would be a quick hacks for pitching? Like when you're pitching a project to a major producer, what would you say what would you need to have in your ducks in a row? What would be the primary thing that you would need other than great storytelling and great, I guess, paraphrasing?
I would, my best advice would be to have a really, really strong 2-minute synopsis of what you're trying to sell. And then, you can get into the weeds as you develop and discuss more. But when you get in a room with someone that's a decision maker, you have to really grab them, and a lot of these guys don't have long attention spans. So I always focus on, being really tight in a 2-minute, an extended elevator pitch, I guess. If people don't know what an elevator pitch is, an elevator pitch is, if you're in an elevator with someone and all you have is those 10 seconds to sell them on something, what's your pitch? So I try to take a 10-second elevator pitch and mold it into like a 2-minute sales speech, I guess. Usually you want to have a deck that goes along with that. A deck is like a visual accompaniment that you can put on a screen that is, a sales point for whatever project you're doing that, has pictures and graphics. So, between a strong deck and a strong 2-minute breakdown of what story you're trying to tell, why it's important to be told, who the audience is, and where you see it landing, and how you see it, conceptually.
And do you tell the whole story, or I mean, in the sense you tell the kind of like what the end result will be? You want to hit
the high point. You want to hit the high points.
Right, but I mean, you don't tell them all of the detail. You don't tell them the best bits. You tell them a little bit of the best bits, but maybe don't tell them the ending, as it were.
Yeah, and people like it's cliche, but it's something that is actually useful. people like I'm in the process of pitching something right now, and if you say something like, okay, so what I have for you right now is like Hoosiers meets Friday Night Lights meets Lords of Dogtown. So
right.
when you can explain to them, like, this is like 2 or 3 movies that are kind of cross-sectioned, or blended together, and that's your concept. It's easy for people to visualize if they have a point of reference like that. So
okay,
you say, it's Goodfellas meets Schindler's List.
Fair enough. That might just be the future of the government right now. And that's actually, I was going to say to you, where to find out more of your information, but I would like, during the time that we're going through now with the pandemic, what would you say to people as an investigator, as someone who does investigative journalism and really knows how, like you said, to go to the source? It's very difficult nowadays to go to the source because everything is digital. We can't walk into a library and find. We should be able to printed publications. In some ways,
it's better. In some ways, it's better though, because now you have, through social media, you have direct access to a lot of these people.
You do, but do you not see? I mean, I've noticed a lot of stuff being taken down. Even stuff that was up on PubMed has just been pulled, in regards to what's going on with numbers and.
Oh well, that's the whole. Well, we were talking about the pandemic.
Yeah, we are. What do you think about?
I'm talking more about how the modern media landscape actually makes it easier to go to the source of, for someone like myself, where you can get a hold of people or get a hold of people who can get a hold of people for you. I've gotten in contact with a number of criminal figures from just contacting their wives or their daughters or their sons on social media for them to connect me to them.
So would you say to people,
if not connecting directly with the wise guy or former gangster on social media itself, because a lot of these guys are managing their own social media accounts.
Well, there you go. So, but in the state of where people need to think before they just assume or they just, take whatever is thrown at them. In the example of Rick Wershey Jr., where the government has played and used a child, would you sort of say maybe do some investigative journalism yourself, like look into sources before you just listen and trust everything you hear on television, as it were?
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well,
in this case, nothing was what met the eye. If you took the government's word, or you even took the media's word in 2006, you got a completely distorted version of the story. And then I came in, and within 5 minutes of sitting with Rick in prison, he started to tell me this different story, and I was able to confirm it within 2 days. So he gave me all the access points. I just had to follow them up. And, I was on the phone with retired FBI agents and retired Detroit Police Department narcotics detectives, within a couple minutes of getting out of that prison. And I was starting to confirm it on my trip back to Detroit from visiting him at a prison around the Bay City, Michigan area.
All right. Well, for people who want to know a little bit more about what you do, I'm very interested in your OG podcast. That sounds amazing. Where would the best place be for people to find your information and follow up on your documentaries and books and podcasts?
You can go to Amazon. I have a page on Amazon. You can go to my web magazine, Gangster Report, www.gangsterreport.com. You can get me on Facebook, Scott M. Burnstein, Burnstein. You can get me on Twitter, Bernie's Tweets, BurneysTweets. Original Gangsters podcast, get it wherever podcasts are consumed, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, etc. We have about 30 episodes of the Original Gangsters podcast, and we're producing new content every week.
Okay, and perfect.
Then, you just go to your television set and go into your Netflix or your Amazon Prime, and you put in my name, you can see all my documentaries.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott. It has been an absolute pleasure. And people, you can go onto lifehacks.com. That's with a K and an X. And on Radio X, you will hear this podcast as well. And we will have the blog follow-up of Scott's information and everything else. I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
LifeHakX. lifehacks.com. That's with a K and an X on Radio X.